The Mafia boss's daughter wouldn't stop crying until the Black Maid's song revealed her secret past. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The air was thick with the scent of roses and expensive perfume, the soft hum of luxury swirling around the grand mansion. It was the kind of house where silence could be felt in every room. In one of the plush sitting rooms, a small girl, no older than 6, sat on the floor, her tiny shoulders trembling with sobs. Her cries echoed in the vast emptiness, each sound a stark reminder of the pain she carried. Her father, the infamous Mafia boss, stood by the door, watching his daughter with a furrowed brow, helpless. He had seen violence, betrayal, and loss, but nothing broke him like seeing his child suffer. His heart clenched as the sound of her cries reached a crescendo. There were no words, no comfort, no answers he could give. The room was cold despite the warmth of the fireplace, the fire's crackle failing to soothe the tension. "Stop crying, sweetheart," he murmured, but his voice held no real power over her grief. His daughter, the one piece of his humanity, was too consumed by sorrow to hear him. The more he tried to comfort her, the louder her wails became. He was the most powerful man in the city, but here, in this moment, he was powerless. As the minutes ticked by, the Mafia boss stood frozen, his mind racing for a solution. But nothing came. His daughter's cries grew louder, echoing off the marble floors, a sound that tore at his soul. Outside, a storm began to brew, its thunder rumbling in the distance. Inside, the silence was broken only by the wailing of the young girl. Her pain was so raw, so pure, that it seemed to fill the entire mansion. In the midst of this chaos, a figure entered the room. The Black Maid, a quiet and humble woman, stepped through the doorway with soft, deliberate steps. She had heard the commotion from the hallway and knew what was happening. She had been working for the family for years, moving quietly in the background, invisible to the world that surrounded her. But today was different. Today, the sound of the girl's crying had reached her heart, and something inside her stirred. She had seen pain before, felt it in the deepest parts of her soul. She had learned long ago that sometimes, the best way to heal the heart was through the most unexpected of acts. Without a word, the maid walked towards the girl, her movements fluid, graceful even in the midst of such turmoil. The Mafia boss watched, unsure of what she intended to do. He had never seen her interact with his daughter before, never needed to. But now, something in her presence seemed to calm the chaos. The maid knelt down beside the little girl, her gentle touch brushing the girl's trembling back. "Shoo, my dear," she whispered softly, her voice carrying a quiet strength that immediately drew the girl's attention. For a moment, there was no response, only the sound of the storm outside and the girl's hiccuping sobs. But then, as if sensing the sincerity in the maid's voice, the little girl looked up, her tear-streaked face filled with confusion and pain. The maid smiled gently, her dark eyes filled with empathy. "Would you like to hear a song, little one?" she asked. The girl sniffled and nodded, her small form collapsing against the maid's chest. Without waiting, the maid began to sing. Her voice was soft, soothing, a lullaby that seemed to carry with it the weight of generations. The melody was ancient, a song passed down from mothers to daughters, from grandmother to granddaughter. It was the kind of song that, when sung, could heal the deepest wounds, even those that ran far beyond the physical. The Mafia boss, still standing in the doorway, felt his heart tighten as the song filled the room. For a moment, he forgot about the world he controlled, the empire he built. All that mattered was the soft sound of the maid's voice and the quiet, tentative calm that seemed to envelop his daughter. As the final notes of the song echoed in the room, the little girl's crying subsided. She had stopped crying completely, her small hands gripping the maid's arms, her face now peaceful, her eyes heavy with sleep. The Mafia boss couldn't believe what he had witnessed. He had spent so many years wielding power, controlling lives, and enforcing fear, but in that moment, it was the Black Maid's song that had saved his daughter. In the stillness that followed, he could hardly bring himself to speak. He stood there, staring at the two of them, realizing for the first time that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't power that healed, but kindness. I was standing at the edge of the doorway, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched the scene unfold before me. My daughter, once consumed by tears, now lay in the maid's arms, her breathing slow and steady, her little face peaceful for the first time in hours. The song had worked. It had worked in a way that nothing else had. I never expected it to happen like this. A part of me, a small part one hadn't acknowledged, felt relieved. But there was something more, something deeper I couldn't ignore. A quiet reverence filled the room, and for the first time in ages, I felt vulnerable. I had always been the one in control, the one who dictated the terms of life. But here I was, standing in silence, as the woman who cleaned our house, a woman I had hardly noticed, held my world in her hands. For a long while, I couldn't speak. I didn't know what to say. I stood frozen in place, unsure whether to thank her, question her, or perhaps do nothing at all. The silence stretched on, and I realized that in some strange, inexplicable way, I had been looking at her all wrong. She was no longer just the maid. She had become something more. A protector, a savior. My daughter stirred slightly, still holding on to the maid, her small hand tightly gripping her arm. I could see the trust in her face, the soft sigh of relief that escaped her lips as she nestled deeper into the woman's embrace. That was when I knew something had changed in both of us. My daughter had never shown such affection to anyone outside of her family. She was a delicate, fragile thing, and yet, in the arms of the maid, she found something she had been missing: comfort. The maid, I realized, had been the key all along. Her presence, her calm, her kindness had broken through the walls that I had so carefully built around her. For a moment, I wanted to speak, to thank her, but the words caught in my throat. What could I say? How could I explain what I was feeling in that moment? My daughter, the one person I had tried so hard to protect, had found solace in the arms of someone I had so easily dismissed as just a servant. It wasn't just my daughter who had changed in those few minutes. I had changed too. The moment felt surreal. How could this woman, this person who had been nothing more than a fixture in my life, suddenly hold such power over my emotions? The door to the room creaked open softly, and I turned to see one of my security guards standing in the hallway, his eyes shifting nervously between the maid and me. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand to stop him. Not now, I said, my voice colder than I intended. I could feel my pulse quicken again as the weight of the situation settled in. My daughter was safe. My daughter was calm, and it had all happened because of her. The maid, the woman who had worked in my home for years without so much as a glance in her direction from me. And yet, here she was, holding my daughter, soothing her in a way that I had failed to do for days. She had become something more than just an employee. She had become part of my family. I moved toward them, my footsteps slow and deliberate. My daughter's eyes fluttered open, and she gazed up at me, her lips curling into a small, fragile smile. "Papa," she whispered, her voice still weak but filled with a quiet joy. "She's nice." My heart clenched at her words. I knew she didn't fully understand what had just happened, but in that moment, she understood something I had yet to realize. The maid wasn't just here to serve us. She was here to teach us. She was here to remind me that kindness, the simplest form of kindness, was more powerful than any empire I had built. I looked down at her, my gaze softening for the first time in years. I had spent so much of my life focused on control, on strength, on keeping my family in line, that I had forgotten the simple truth that kindness, love, and compassion could change everything. The maid lifted her head slightly, meeting my eyes for the first time since she had entered the room. There was no fear in her gaze, no hesitation, only calm, and something else. Something that was far more powerful than any fear she should have felt standing before me. Respect. "Thank you," I said, my voice low but sincere. It was all I could manage. She simply nodded, her expression soft, her hands still cradling my daughter. I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, mixed with something else. Something unfamiliar. It was humility. It was the realization that in her silence, in her simplicity, this woman had taught me something I had forgotten long ago. As the moments passed, I knew that things would never be the same again. The storm outside raged on, but inside, in this room, there was a quiet peace. I stepped back from the doorway, watching as the maid continued to comfort my daughter, her voice soft as she hummed a gentle lullaby. I had no words left, no questions, just a deep sense of understanding that would stay with me forever. Things had changed, and for the first time, I realized that it was for the better. I stood in the doorway, watching the maid as she continued to comfort my daughter, her calm presence filling the room like a warm blanket. It had been hours since that first moment, hours since the storm had subsided within my daughter, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside me had changed. The chaos of my world, of power, control, and endless battles, seemed so distant now. My daughter, for the first time in days, was at peace, and it had all been thanks to her. The maid. The woman I had overlooked, dismissed, and never really noticed. But now, she had become an anchor in this storm of emotions, a steady presence I hadn't known I needed. I could hear the quiet rhythm of her breathing, the gentle hum of a song she had been singing softly to my daughter. The notes hung in the air, a melody that was both unfamiliar and strangely comforting. I felt an overwhelming desire to understand her, to learn what had made her so capable of providing the comfort my family desperately needed. It was like a crack in the walls I had built around myself, a crack that let a bit of light in. For years, I had built my empire on fear, violence, and ruthless ambition. I had protected my family by force, by making sure no one could touch us, no one could break through our defenses. But I had never protected them with kindness. And now, here she was, this woman, this maid, who had done just that. I walked toward her, my feet silent on the marble floor. She didn't look up, still focused on my daughter, her hands tenderly brushing through her hair. I had never seen my daughter so calm, so trusting in anyone outside of our family. It made my chest tighten with a strange feeling, something I couldn't quite put into words. I stood there for a moment, unsure of how to approach her. How do you thank someone for saving your family without even asking for recognition? How do you thank someone for offering the kind of protection and comfort that money and power can never provide? The maid finally looked up, meeting my gaze. Her eyes were steady, calm, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. But I could see something in them, a quiet strength that resonated with me on a level I hadn't expected. I cleared my throat, my voice sounding more distant than I intended. "Thank you," I said, my words coming out softer than I had expected. "For what you did. For her." The maid nodded, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak, but the acknowledgement was enough. It was all I needed. There was a long silence between us, one that stretched on longer than I anticipated. I could feel the weight of the moment, the shift in the air, but I couldn't find the right words to break it. My mind raced with questions, but nothing seemed appropriate. I had never been one for idle talk, never been one to open up to anyone. Yet here I was, standing in front of someone who had shown me more humanity in one evening than I had ever shown in my entire life. It wasn't just about my daughter anymore. It was about me. And it was about the realization that I had been wrong all these years. I had built my empire on strength, on controlling everything and everyone around me. I had thought that was the way to protect my family. But now I understood. Protection didn't come from strength. It came from trust. And trust could be earned through kindness. My daughter shifted in the maid's arms, her eyes fluttering open. She smiled softly, a little tired smile, but a smile nonetheless. "Papa," she whispered, her voice still hoarse from crying earlier. "She's nice." My heart tightened at the sound of her words. She hadn't smiled like that in days. Not since the accident. Not since everything had changed. The storm had passed, but I realized that it wasn't just the storm outside that had passed. It was something inside of me that had shifted. I turned away, my mind racing with new thoughts. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how to change. But I knew one thing. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The maid stood slowly, still holding my daughter in her arms. She glanced at me once more, her expression serene. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't demand any recognition. She had done it all without expecting a thing. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift of all. It was an offering of kindness, pure and simple, without any agenda, without any expectation of return. She had taught me more about loyalty and protection in a single night than anyone else ever had. I watched them leave the room, the maid carrying my daughter out to the garden, where the soft moonlight bathed the space in silver. I stayed behind for a moment, alone with my thoughts, wondering how I could ever repay her. But the answer was simple. I didn't need to repay her. I needed to learn from her. And for the first time in years, I felt something stir within me. A desire to change. A desire to protect my family in a way that I had never done before. I wasn't sure how it would all play out. I didn't know if I would ever fully change. But I knew this. I had to try. I had to be better for my daughter, for my family. And for the maid, the woman who had shown me that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show kindness. I stood by the window, watching the soft light of the evening spill across the mansion's manicured lawn. The storm that had raged outside was now just a distant memory, but something still lingered in the air. It wasn't just the aftermath of the rain. It was a shift, a quiet change that had happened in me, in my family, in the way I saw the world. I couldn't ignore it, and I didn't want to. The sound of footsteps behind me broke my thoughts. I turned to see the maid, still holding my daughter in her arms, entering the room. The calmness in her demeanor was the same as it had been earlier, but now, there was a new layer to it. It wasn't just the softness she exuded. It was something deeper, something more. "She's finally asleep," the maid said, her voice gentle, almost like a whisper. My daughter, the one who had been so frail, so caught in her own world of fear and sadness, was finally resting. It had been hours since the moment she had fallen silent in the maid's arms, but I still couldn't shake the image of her peaceful face. It was a relief, a weight lifted, but it was also a reminder. A reminder that there were things in this world that power and control could never fix. I nodded, my words stuck in my throat. I had wanted to thank her before, but now I wasn't sure what to say. Thank you felt so small compared to what she had done. And yet, it was the only thing I could offer. "You're welcome," the maid said, as if reading my mind, her voice calm as ever. She needed someone. That's all. That simple statement caught me off guard. She needed someone. It was so basic, so simple, yet it had never crossed my mind. I had spent my life building walls, not just around my empire, but around my family as well. I had controlled everything, protected them from the world outside. But I had never once stopped to think if they needed more than that. I had never once considered that my daughter, in her quiet way, needed someone who could simply hold her, comfort her, and show her kindness. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door closing, followed by the muffled voices of my security team outside. The world outside was still turning, still full of the dangers I had spent my life protecting my family from. And yet, in this moment, it all seemed so distant. The chaos, the violence, it didn't matter. Not right now. I took a deep breath, then turned my attention back to the maid. "You've done more than anyone could have expected," I said, finally finding my voice. "I won't forget this." She didn't say anything, just gave me a small nod, her eyes still focused on my daughter. It was clear that she didn't need my gratitude, that her actions were driven by something far greater than any recognition. And yet, it felt right to say it. It felt like something that needed to be said. "Is there anything you need?" I asked, my voice quieter now. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable for a moment, before she shook her head. "No, sir. I'm just doing my job." Her response was humble, but it held a quiet strength. It was a strength that came from knowing her purpose, from understanding that she was part of something bigger than herself. I stood there for a moment, lost in thought. I had built an empire on fear and power, but here I was, humbled by a simple act of kindness. I had spent years forcing my way through life, demanding respect, and never stopping to ask if I was doing things the right way. And now, in front of me, was someone who had shown me that there was another way, a better way, a way that didn't rely on fear or force, but on trust and compassion. "I need you to stay," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. The maid raised an eyebrow, her expression surprised, but she didn't speak. "You've earned my trust," I continued, my tone firm, yet softer than I had ever spoken before. "Stay? And if you want, I'll make sure you're taken care of. Your position in this house, it will be different." She was silent for a long moment, and I could see the hesitation in her eyes. I wasn't sure if she wanted to stay, or if she had already made up her mind to leave. But then, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded. "I'll stay," she said quietly. For her, my heart tightened at her words. I knew that she wasn't staying for me, or for the power I had at my disposal. She was staying for my daughter, for the chance to protect her, to care for her in the way that I hadn't been able to. And that, in itself, was a gift. As the maid left the room to place my daughter back in her bed, I stood there for a while longer, my thoughts swirling. I realized that I had a long way to go. I wasn't going to change overnight. But something had shifted. Something had clicked into place. I wasn't sure where this journey would take me, or what the future held, but I knew one thing. For the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it. And it wasn't going to be with force. It was going to be with kindness, with trust, with a new understanding of what it meant to protect my family. I could feel it in my bones. Things were going to change. And for the first time, I welcomed it. I had never imagined that a single night could shift everything. But standing in the silence of the mansion, I felt it deep within me. Things were changing, not just for my daughter, but for me. The maid had stayed. And in the days that followed, I could see the effects of her presence, not only on my daughter, but on the entire house. It was subtle at first, a quiet shift, but it was undeniable. My daughter's laughter, once a rare sound, now echoed through the halls. She had become attached to the maid in a way that went beyond comfort. It was trust. A trust that, in many ways, I had failed to provide her. I watched them together more than I ever had before. The maid was always calm, always patient. It was as if she had an understanding of my daughter that no one else did. I began to realize that it wasn't just my daughter who needed her, but perhaps I did too. For the first time, I found myself listening, not to the demands of my empire, but to the quiet moments around me. The sound of the maid humming softly to my daughter, the way she guided her gently through her day, teaching her lessons that went beyond books. It was those moments that made me question everything I had believed about strength and protection. The house, once a fortress built on control, now felt different. There was a warmth to it, a hum of life that hadn't been there before. It wasn't the luxurious surroundings or the wealth I had accumulated. It was something else, something intangible that I couldn't quite put into words. The maid had brought it with her. But it wasn't just her presence that changed things. It was the way she lived, the way she interacted with my family. She treated everyone with respect, from the lowest servant to the highest guest. She didn't demand anything from anyone. She didn't ask for recognition or payment. She simply gave. She gave her time, her patience, and most of all, her heart. I began to wonder if that was the key all along. Was I so blind to think that power, fear, and control were the only ways to protect those I loved? Had I truly believed that keeping everything under my thumb was the answer? I had made enemies. I had built walls around my family to keep them safe from the dangers of the world, but in doing so, I had isolated them. I had kept them locked away, and in the process, I had neglected what really mattered, connection. As the days passed, my daughter's bond with the maid grew stronger. And it wasn't just my daughter who was changing. I was too. I found myself talking to the maid more, asking her about her life, about the things that mattered to her. I had always been so caught up in my own world that I had never really stopped to think about the lives of those around me. But now, I realized how much I had been missing. The maid was more than just an employee. She was a person with dreams, with a history, with a life outside of this house. And I wanted to know about it. One evening, after my daughter had gone to sleep, I found myself sitting across from the maid in the grand dining room. The mansion was quiet, the only sound being the crackling of the fire in the hearth. I had no particular reason for asking, but I found myself speaking without thinking. "What brought you here?" I asked. She looked at me, her expression neutral, as if she had anticipated the question. "I needed work," she replied simply, her voice steady. But more than that, I wanted peace. I could see the weight of her words, the quiet truth in them. She wasn't just looking for a job. She was looking for something more. And in many ways, so was I. I had spent my life building an empire, but I had never stopped to ask myself what I was truly building it for. Now, I realized it wasn't enough to just protect my family. It wasn't enough to have wealth or power. What mattered was what we did with it. What mattered was how we treated each other. I sat back in my chair, processing her words, feeling a shift inside of me. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing. I wanted to do better. For my family, for myself, and for her. The maid had shown me that there was more to life than what I had been living. There was a softness, a gentleness, that I had pushed away for far too long. But now, in the quiet of the mansion, with my daughter safe and sound, I knew that I had to change. I wasn't sure what the future would hold, or how I would navigate the complicated web of my life. But for the first time, I felt like I had the strength to face it. I had spent my life hiding behind power, but now, I wanted to face the world with something different: kindness. I looked at the maid, who had been watching me quietly, as if she understood the weight of what I was feeling. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "For everything." She nodded, a soft smile playing at the corner of her lips. "I'm just doing my job," she replied, but I could see the sincerity in her eyes. It wasn't just her job. It was something much more. And I realized, as I sat there with her, that it was no longer just about my empire. It was about the people in it. The ones I had overlooked, the ones I had neglected, the ones who had been there all along, quietly offering the very thing I needed the most. I stood up, my resolve stronger than ever. "Things are going to change," I said, looking at her with newfound respect. "For all of us." I had never imagined the peace that had descended upon our home could be this lasting. Each day that passed brought more change, more growth. The maid, now no longer just a servant, had transformed not only my daughter's life, but my own. I watched as she and my daughter grew closer, their bond deepening each day. It was as if my daughter, once so isolated in her own world, had found someone who truly understood her. And in that, she began to flourish. For the first time in a long while, the mansion felt like a home, not just a place of opulence. I saw the difference in my daughter's eyes, heard it in her laughter, and felt it in the air. There was something real in the warmth that filled the rooms now. And that warmth came from the maid. It was difficult to ignore. But for me, it wasn't just about the changes I saw in her or my daughter. It was the realization of how much I had failed to truly see them before. I had spent my life surrounded by wealth and power, building an empire that seemed so solid, so unshakable. But what had I really been building? A fortress or a prison? That was the question that kept echoing in my mind. I had spent so many years hiding behind my position, thinking that strength was the answer, that control was what mattered. But now, I understood differently. Strength came not from domination, but from trust and understanding. That realization hit me one evening when I was alone in my office, looking through the reports that had accumulated on my desk. Everything felt so distant now. The numbers, the deals, the politics, none of it mattered. I was no longer the man I had been. I was someone else, someone who had learned that power wasn't about being feared, but about being able to offer something meaningful to those you loved. It was that night that I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I called the maid into my office, asking her to sit with me. She was still as calm as ever, her demeanor unshaken by the weight of the mansion or my title. "You've changed things here," I began, my voice steady but quieter than usual. "I've noticed it. My daughter, she's different. And you've changed. Things for me too." She didn't speak immediately, simply nodded as if she had anticipated what I would say. "I want to offer you something," I continued, the words feeling heavy with sincerity. "Not just a position in my house, but something more. You've earned my respect, and I would like you to take on a role in this family, not as just someone who works here, but as someone who is a part of it. You're important to us." To me. She looked at me then, her eyes thoughtful, searching, but without hesitation, she nodded again. "I've never wanted anything more than to see her happy, sir," she said softly. "I've seen the changes in her, and that is enough for me." Her words struck me deeply. She wasn't after power or money or anything that I could give her. She wanted something far more valuable, the chance to make a real difference, to make a connection. And she had. She had made the connection that I had failed to see. In that moment, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For so long, I had carried the burden of my empire, my name, my reputation. But now, I realized the true burden was not protecting my title. It was protecting the people I loved in a way that mattered, a way that went beyond wealth or status. That night, after our conversation, I felt a change within me that was profound. It wasn't just the maid's song or her kindness. It was the realization that she had shown me a truth I had been blind to. True strength wasn't about power. It was about vulnerability, trust, and love. I stood up from my desk, looking out the window, as the city lights twinkled in the distance. There was still so much to do, so much to face. The dangers, the enemies, they were all still there, lurking in the shadows of the life I had built. But I was no longer afraid of them. I no longer needed to hide behind my title, my wealth, my empire. I had something far more valuable now. I had a family that was beginning to heal, a daughter who was beginning to trust again, and a woman who had shown me how to open my heart. And as I stood there, feeling the weight of everything that had changed, I knew one thing for certain. I would protect them, not with force, but with kindness, with trust, and with the understanding that love was the greatest power of all. The world would never be the same, and I was ready to face it, side by side with those I had failed to see, but who had always been there, waiting for me to understand. I had spent my life trying to control every aspect of my world. I built an empire, one that demanded respect, one that demanded fear. But as I stood there, watching my daughter's face soften as she played in the garden with the maid, I realized that I had been looking at the world all wrong. Control, power, and intimidation weren't the things that would keep my family safe. It was love. It was trust. It was connection. The maid had been a part of my daughter's life for weeks now, and every day, I saw the change. My daughter, once a quiet and withdrawn little girl, was now full of life, her laughter ringing through the halls. And it wasn't just her. I had changed too. I had never understood the importance of kindness until I saw it in action. Until I saw the way the maid cared for my daughter, how she treated her with the gentleness and compassion I had never been able to offer. It was a lesson in humility. A lesson I wasn't sure I was ready to learn, but one I had to. I walked down the long hallway, the marble floors reflecting the light from the grand chandelier above. The mansion was quiet, too quiet. The air felt heavy with unspoken words. As I passed my daughter's room, I saw the maid standing in the doorway, watching her as she slept. Her back was turned to me, but I could still see the way she held herself, confident, yet humble. I had never asked her about her life, about her past. I didn't even know where she came from or what she dreamed of. I had never taken the time to ask. But now, I found myself wondering about the woman who had changed everything in my life. I cleared my throat, and she turned to face me. Her eyes were calm, but there was something in them that I couldn't quite place. "May I speak with you?" I asked, my voice lower than usual. She nodded, stepping aside to allow me to enter. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. I wasn't sure where to start. I had spent so many years hiding behind my title, behind my power, but in that moment, none of that mattered. It was just us, two people who had been brought together by circumstances neither of us could control. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened," I said, my words careful. "About how much you've done for my family, for my daughter, and for me." She didn't speak, but I could see the way she looked at me, as if waiting for me to continue. "I wanted to thank you," I said, the words coming out more awkwardly than I had intended. "I don't think I can ever repay you for what you've done, but I want you to know that I appreciate it. All of it." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "It's my job, sir," she replied softly, the humility in her voice unmistakable. I shook my head, feeling the weight of her words. "It's more than that," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You've given my daughter something I could never give her. You've given her love. And in turn, you've shown me what I've been missing. I've spent my life building walls, protecting my family with power and control. But what you've done, it's different. It's the kind of protection I never knew we needed." She was silent for a long moment, her eyes locked on mine. It was as if she could see through me, past the facade I had carefully constructed. "I didn't do it for thanks," she said, her voice low but steady. "I did it because she needed someone. And because I care." The simplicity of her words hit me harder than any speech I had ever heard. She wasn't looking for recognition, for power, or for anything other than the chance to help. She had no agenda, no desire for anything other than to make a difference. And that was something I had never truly understood until now. "I don't know what to do with all of this," I said, running a hand through my hair. "I've spent so much of my life focused on things that don't really matter. But now, I see things differently." She stepped forward, placing a hand gently on my arm. "It's not too late," she said, her voice soft but reassuring. "You can still change. For them. For yourself." I looked at her, at the woman who had shown me a new way of seeing the world, and something inside me shifted. The walls I had spent so many years building were beginning to crumble. I didn't need to be feared. I didn't need to control everything. I needed to learn how to let go. "Thank you," I said again, the words feeling inadequate, but it was all I could manage. She smiled, a small, knowing smile. "You're welcome," she said, before turning back to my daughter's room. I stood there for a moment, alone with my thoughts. The mansion no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a home. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that this was what truly mattered. I didn't need to protect my family with fear and control. I needed to protect them with love, trust, and kindness. And with that, I made a silent promise to myself. I would do better. For them. For me. For her. I had never known peace like this. The once immense mansion, filled with the weight of ambition and power, had transformed into something entirely different. Something warmer. Something softer. It was a new kind of strength that had taken root in the very foundation of this place. I could feel it in the air, in the way my daughter laughed, in the way the maid moved through the halls, not just as someone who served us, but as part of us. My daughter had grown closer to her trust in the maid undeniable, and it was clear that this connection was something that even I, the Mafia boss, could not understand fully, but I respected it. I watched them together, and I could see the bond they shared was growing stronger with each passing day. The maid, with her gentle touch, her soft words, and her unwavering patience, had become not just a caretaker, but a guide, helping my daughter navigate a world that had once been too overwhelming for her. I had seen her behavior change, her confidence building with every passing moment. And as for me, I could no longer pretend that the way I had been living, behind walls of power and control, was the only way. The lesson had been taught in a way I had never anticipated, and the shift in my mindset was undeniable. I was no longer the man I had been, and I wasn't sure where the path would take me, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid. The days passed in a haze of new beginnings, and as the mansion became more than just a place to sleep and work, I found myself spending more time with my daughter and the maid. It was a strange sensation to sit down at the dinner table and not feel the need to control every conversation, every glance. I could see my daughter and the maid exchanging soft smiles, the kind that only came from genuine care. It made me uncomfortable at first, this newfound space between us, but I realized it wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace. One evening, as I sat in my study, going over some old business, I was interrupted by a knock at the door. I looked up to find the maid standing there, her presence calm and confident. "Is everything all right?" I asked, my voice still carrying the weight of a man who had once been accustomed to absolute control. She nodded, her expression serious but warm. "Yes, sir. I just wanted to check on you, to see if there was anything you needed." Her words were simple, but there was something deeper in them. It wasn't about what I needed. It was about what was happening in this house, what was happening within me. She had become a steady force, a constant in this chaotic world I had created. And for the first time, I understood why she had stayed. She wasn't here for the wealth, the power, or the luxury that came with being in this mansion. She was here because she had a purpose that had nothing to do with anything I had built. She was here to help my daughter, to offer her the one thing I had never truly been able to give, a sense of security. It hit me then, like a wave crashing against the rocks. I had spent so much time focusing on the things that didn't matter, and in the process, I had neglected what truly mattered, my family, my daughter, the people who had been right in front of me, needing something I couldn't give them until now. The maid had given me the clarity I needed. She had shown me that family wasn't about control or domination. It was about love. It was about trust. It was about allowing others to be who they were, without fear. I stood up from my desk, the decision clear in my mind. "Thank you," I said to her, my voice softer now. "For everything. For teaching me what I've been missing." She gave a small smile, her eyes filled with understanding. "It's my honor, sir," she said simply. But her words held a weight that I could not ignore. "You've helped me see that I've been blind to what really matters," I continued, stepping closer. "And I want to do better. For them. For you." She didn't respond right away, but I could see something in her eyes. It wasn't surprise or pride. It was something simpler, something pure, satisfaction. She didn't need anything from me. She had already given me more than I could ever repay. As the days continued, I found myself changing. I spent more time with my daughter, more time listening to her, watching her as she grew under the maid's guidance. I didn't need to control everything. I didn't need to protect her from every danger. I just needed to be there. And that was enough. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be truly present. Not as the Mafia boss, not as the man who controlled everything, but as a father. as a man who had finally learned the value of kindness and love. It was a humbling experience. The world outside would still be there, with its dangers and its challenges. But inside, within the walls of this mansion, something had changed. Something real. And it was worth protecting, not with force or power, but with the things that truly mattered. And for the first time, I knew how to protect my family. I didn't need to be the strongest man in the room. I just needed to be the man who loved them the most. I stood by the window that evening, watching the last remnants of daylight fade into the horizon. The mansion, once filled with a sense of tension and control, now felt different. There was a calmness that I hadn't known for years, and I realized it wasn't just because of the changes in my daughter or the maid. It was because I had finally allowed myself to let go, to step back and see the world around me in a new light. The walls I had so carefully built were crumbling, not from an outside force, but from within. I had spent so much time fearing what would happen if I lost control. But now, I understood that control wasn't everything. The soft sound of footsteps approached, and I turned to see the maid walking down the hallway, her presence calm as always. She had been with us for weeks now, and in that time, I had learned more than I had ever expected. I had learned about kindness, about vulnerability, and about the strength that came from letting go. "How is she?" I asked, my voice softer than I had intended. The maid smiled as she stopped beside me, her eyes soft with understanding. "She's asleep," she replied, her tone gentle. "I think she's finally at peace." My heart swelled with gratitude at her words. My daughter had been through so much, and yet, in the span of just a few weeks, she had found something she had been missing for so long: peace. She had found it in the maid's kindness, in her gentle care, and in the trust that had grown between them. It was a trust that I had never been able to offer her, not in the way that the maid had. And it had changed everything. I had spent so much of my life focused on building my empire, on protecting my family with power and fear. But now, I understood that protection didn't come from force. It came from trust. It came from love. And for the first time, I realized that the things I had been protecting, wealth, status, power, were nothing compared to the things I had been neglecting, my family. The maid had shown me that. She had shown me the importance of what really mattered. I turned to her then, my gaze steady as I met her eyes. "I owe you more than I can ever say," I said quietly. "You've done something for my daughter that I could never have done. And for that, I am forever grateful." She nodded, her expression calm as ever. "It was never about gratitude," she said softly. "It was about what she needed." I stood there, unsure of how to respond. For the first time in a long time, I felt lost. I had always been the one in control, the one who made decisions, the one who protected. But now, I realized that I didn't have all the answers. I didn't have the power I once thought I had. And that was okay. "You've taught me a lot," I said, my voice quiet. "More than anyone ever has." She gave me a small smile, one that held no judgment, only understanding. "Sometimes," she said, "the things we need to learn come when we least expect them." I nodded, absorbing her words. I had spent so much of my life thinking that I had to be in control of everything, that I had to be the one who dictated the terms of our lives. But now I understood. True strength wasn't about domination. It was about allowing those you love to stand by your side, to help carry the weight, and to trust them enough to let go. "I want you to stay," I said, the words feeling more natural than I expected. "Not just as a maid, but as part of this family. You've earned a place here, not because of what you do, but because of who you are." She looked at me for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Then, she nodded. "I'll stay," she said quietly. "For her. And for you." I could feel a weight lift from my chest, a weight I hadn't even known I was carrying. She had become part of our family, not just through her actions, but through her heart. She had shown me that love and trust could heal wounds I hadn't even known existed. And now, as I stood there with her, I knew that things were changing for the better. I wasn't the man I had been before, and my family wasn't the same either. We had all been given a chance to grow, to change, and to understand what it meant to truly care for one another. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, I felt ready to face it. I didn't need to be the strongest man in the room anymore. I just needed to be the man who loved his family with all his heart. I had never imagined I could feel so much at peace in this mansion. It wasn't just the silence that filled the halls now, but a deeper stillness, the kind that comes when you've faced your own flaws and chosen to do something about it. The air was different, lighter somehow. My daughter, once so distant and guarded, now ran through the halls with a smile on her face, the kind of smile I had feared I might never see again. And I had the maid to thank for that. For her patience, her care, her presence. She had done what I couldn't. She had reached my daughter in a way I never could, and in doing so, she had shown me what truly mattered. The woman who had once been invisible to me, a mere employee, had become the very heart of this family. I couldn't deny it anymore. It was no longer just about the things I controlled, the empire I had built. The real strength came from love, from letting go, and trusting those you care about to help carry the weight. It wasn't easy for me to admit, but I was learning. Slowly, but I was learning. I stood in my office, the weight of the day's events still hanging on my shoulders. The maid had left to tend to my daughter, her figure disappearing into the distance. I had watched them both for so long, and I had to face the truth. I had been wrong about so many things. I had spent my life believing that power and control were the answers. That fear would keep my family safe. But now, I saw the cracks in that foundation. I saw the emptiness I had created. My daughter was healing, yes, but I wasn't the one who had healed her. She had found that healing in the one person I had taken for granted. The maid had brought her back from the brink, not with force, not with authority, but with kindness and patience. And as for me, I realized that I needed to do the same. I had spent so many years hiding behind my wealth, behind my title, behind my actions as a mafia boss. But what did it all mean if I wasn't truly there for the people I loved? What did it mean if I couldn't offer them something real? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. I looked up to see the maid standing there once again, her calm presence filling the room. She didn't speak immediately, but the weight of her eyes told me she was waiting for something. I wasn't sure what to say, but I knew I had to say something. The silence between us had become too thick to ignore. I've been thinking, I began, my voice quieter than usual. About everything. About what's happened here. About what you've done. She stood there, her posture relaxed but attentive, as though she had already known what I was going to say. You've done more than anyone could have expected, I said, the words feeling like they barely captured the depth of my gratitude. You've changed my daughter's life, and in doing so, you've changed mine. She didn't say anything at first, just nodded slightly. But her eyes softened, as though she understood the weight of my words. I'm glad she's doing better, she said simply. That's all that matters to me. It was clear to me now that the maid didn't do things for recognition. She didn't care about rewards, about anything other than the well-being of my daughter. She had entered this family, not out of necessity, but out of a genuine desire to help. She had given my daughter something I couldn't give her, a sense of security, a sense of love that wasn't rooted in fear or control. It was a humbling realization. I stood there for a moment, trying to find the right words, but I knew there were none. I didn't need to say anything else. I had to show her. I had to show myself and my daughter what it meant to truly be a family. It wasn't about the walls I had built around us. It wasn't about the power I had over the world. It was about connection, trust, love. And for the first time, I felt that connection, that bond, forming between us. I stepped closer to her, the weight of everything I had learned over the past weeks settling on me. I've been selfish, I said, my voice breaking the silence. I've been so focused on protecting everything. I forgot what was truly important. You've reminded me of that, and I want to make things right. She didn't respond immediately, but her eyes met. Mine with a warmth that I hadn't expected. You're already making it right, she said softly, her voice gentle. You're here. You're trying. I felt a lump rise in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. The simplicity of her words, the grace with which she spoke, moved me in a way I hadn't anticipated. It was true. I was trying, and that was all that mattered. I want you to stay, I said, my words more confident now. Not just for my daughter, but for me, for our family. She hesitated for a moment, her gaze flickering to the doorway where my daughter was. But then, she nodded, a small but knowing smile on her face. I will, she said. And in that moment, I knew that everything had changed. I didn't need to be the most powerful man in the room anymore. I didn't need to control everything. I just needed to be the man who loved his family, who was willing to fight for them, not with power, but with the strength of love and understanding. The future was no longer uncertain. It was full of hope. Hope for the family we were building, together. I stood in the quiet of the mansion, the soft hum of life around me the only sound. Things were changing. I could feel it in the very air. The walls that once held nothing but coldness and silence now felt different. My daughter, once so distant and lost in her own world, was blooming in ways I never thought possible. And the woman who had made this transformation possible, the maid, had become more than just someone who worked in our home. She had become a part of the family. It was a strange feeling to acknowledge that I needed someone other than myself to bring my family together. I had spent my life thinking I could control everything, thinking that power was the answer. But now, I understood the truth. Power wasn't what mattered. Love and trust were. Over the weeks, I had come to realize how much I had taken for granted. My daughter, my wife, even the maid, they all had their own worlds, their own needs, their own desires. And I had been blind to them. I had been so consumed with building my empire that I had forgotten the most important thing, the people I loved. It was a harsh lesson, but one that had been delivered in the most unexpected way. The maid had shown me how to love without fear, how to trust without control. And for that, I would forever be grateful. But the changes didn't stop there. As the days went by, I found myself becoming more involved, not just with my daughter, but with everything around me. The maid's presence in our lives had forced me to look at the world through new eyes. I had started asking questions, things I had never thought to ask before. How was my daughter feeling? What did she need? What had I missed? It wasn't easy to confront the things I had ignored, but it was necessary. And as much as it pained me to realize the mistakes I had made, it also gave me a sense of clarity. I had been given a second chance. A chance to be the father, the husband, the man I should have been all along. I was no longer the man I once was. The fear and anger that had ruled my life had given way to something gentler, something more real. I walked into the living room one evening, finding my daughter and the maid sitting together by the fire. My daughter was reading a book, her head resting on the maid's shoulder, and the maid was humming softly, the same song she had sung weeks ago when she had first soothed my daughter's crying. The sight of them together, so peaceful, filled me with a warmth I had never known. I had never imagined that this was what it would take for me to understand, to see the love and care that had been missing in our lives. It was a lesson I had to learn, not through force or control, but through kindness. I took a deep breath and walked over to them, standing quietly for a moment before speaking. "You're happy, aren't you?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. My daughter looked up, a smile spreading across her face. "Yes, Papa," she said, her voice filled with the kind of joy I had only heard in my dreams. "I'm happy." The maid smiled too, her eyes soft and knowing. "I'm glad," I said quietly, the words carrying more weight than I had expected. "You deserve it." There was a long pause, and I could feel the shift in the room. It was like the walls that had once separated us were finally starting to crumble. "You've done more for her than I ever could," I continued, my voice catching in my throat. "And for that, I'll be forever grateful." The maid didn't respond immediately, but I could see the change in her eyes, the acknowledgement of what had been unspoken for so long. "I just want her to be happy," she said softly. "She deserves that." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "We all do," I replied. And for the first time, I truly understood the meaning of those words. We all deserved happiness. We all deserved to be loved and cared for. And I had spent so many years pushing those things away, thinking they weren't as important as power and control. But now I saw the truth. Love and trust were the foundation of everything. Without them, nothing else mattered. I sat down beside them, my heart full as I watched my daughter and the maid. In that moment, I knew that I had made the right choice. This was the family I had always wanted, the family I had been too blind to see until now. And I would protect them, not with fear or power, but with love. I would be the father and husband they deserved, not the man I had been. The road ahead would not be easy, but it didn't matter. We would walk it together. And for the first time in my life, I knew that I was ready. I stood there for a long moment, my eyes lingering on my daughter and the maid as they continued to sit by the fire. The room was bathed in the soft glow of the flames, the only sound the crackle of burning wood and the soft hum of my daughter's voice as she spoke to the maid. I had never seen her this peaceful, this open. It was like a weight had been lifted from her, a weight I hadn't even known was there until it was gone. I had spent years trying to shield her from the world, trying to protect her with power, with fear. But what I had failed to see was that what she really needed was kindness. What she really needed was someone who could show her love without expecting anything in return. And that someone, I realized, had been standing right in front of me all along. The maid. I turned away from the scene, retreating to the quiet of my office, needing time to process everything that had happened. I had always been a man of action, someone who solved problems with power and control. But now, after everything that had changed, I didn't know where to begin. How could I go back to the life I had built before? How could I return to the man who only saw the world through the lens of strength and dominance? The truth was, I couldn't. I couldn't go back to the way things had been. The changes in my daughter, in myself, were too profound to ignore. I walked to the window, looking out over the sprawling estate, the city lights shimmering in the distance. The mansion that had once felt like a fortress now felt like a place of refuge, a place where love and trust could finally grow. I had a family now, not one bound by fear or control, but one bound by something far stronger, by care, by connection, and by the willingness to be vulnerable. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of the moment wash over me. I had been given a second chance, a chance to be the father and the man I had always hoped I could be. I couldn't waste it, but I also knew that I had a long road ahead of me. The world I had built, the empire I had spent so many years creating, was not going to disappear overnight. There were still enemies, still dangers that threatened everything I held dear. But this time, I wasn't going to face it alone. This time, I had the people I loved by my side. And I had learned that, together, we could face anything. I turned from the window and made my way back to the living room. As I entered, I saw my daughter and the maid standing by the door, looking at me with expressions that I had never seen before. There was no fear in their eyes, no hesitation, just warmth, just trust. I felt a lump form in my throat as I took in the sight. For so long, I had been afraid of what I might lose, afraid of opening myself up to the people I loved. But now I understood. I had never been in danger of losing them. I had only been in danger of losing myself. I approached them, my heart swelling with emotions I had never known I was capable of feeling. I've been thinking. I began, my voice steady but thick with emotion. I've spent so much of my life trying to protect you all in the wrong way. I've been focused on things that don't matter. But you, both of you, have shown me what really matters. You've shown me what it means to love, truly love, without fear. My daughter smiled softly, the light of understanding in her eyes. The maid stood there, quiet but calm, as always, her gaze soft and understanding. I'm not the man I was before, I continued, the words coming more easily now. And I'm not going to pretend I have all the answers. But I know one thing. I want to be the father you deserve, the man you deserve. The maid's eyes met mine, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence between us. It wasn't awkward, though. It was a comfortable silence, one that spoke volumes. You already are, she said, her voice soft but filled with certainty. I felt my chest tighten as I absorbed her words. It was more than just a compliment. It was a recognition of the effort I had put in, of the changes I had made. Thank you, I said, my voice quiet, almost a whisper. Thank you for everything. She nodded, her gaze gentle. You're welcome, sir, she replied. And just like that, I knew I had nothing left to prove. The power, the control, it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the family we had become, the bond we had built. We weren't perfect. We would never be perfect. But we were real. We were together. And that was enough. I stepped forward, my daughter's small hand slipping into mine, the warmth of her touch a reminder of everything I had almost lost. Together, we would face whatever came next, not with fear, but with love. And for the first time, I felt ready. I stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The mansion behind me, once a cold symbol of power and control, now felt like a home. A real home. It was a strange feeling, one I had never truly understood until now. The woman who had walked into my life as just a maid had transformed everything. She had brought with her something more valuable than I could have ever imagined. Peace, trust, love, the very things I had neglected for so long. I turned from the window to see my daughter sitting with the maid in the living room. She was drawing, her little hands moving swiftly over the paper, a smile on her face that I hadn't seen in years. The maid sat beside her, offering quiet words of encouragement, her presence calm and reassuring. My heart swelled with pride, not just for my daughter, but for the life we had started to build together. It hadn't been easy, and I knew the road ahead would still have its challenges. But for the first time, I felt prepared. I didn't need to control everything anymore. I didn't need to hold on so tightly to the power I had fought so hard to achieve. What mattered now was the family we were becoming. I walked toward them, my steps slow, deliberate. The maid looked up as I approached, a soft smile on her face. She had no expectations, no desire for anything other than the simple joy of seeing my daughter happy. And in that moment, I realized that was enough. She had changed my life in a way I could never repay. Not with money, not with power, but with the only thing that truly mattered, my gratitude. "Thank you," I said, my voice quieter than I had expected. "For everything. For showing me what really matters." She nodded, her gaze kind but steady. "I didn't do anything but care," she said, her voice soft. "Your daughter just needed someone to believe in her." I looked at my daughter then, her face alight with joy as she showed the maid her drawing. It was a simple picture, a drawing of the two of them together, smiling in a sunlit garden. It was more than just a picture. It was a symbol of everything we had built, everything we had fought for. A family, a bond, a future. I didn't know how long we would have, how long this new chapter would last. But I knew one thing for certain. I was ready to face whatever came next, ready to stand beside my daughter and the woman who had become more than just our maid. She had become our protector, our guide, our family. And I would protect them with everything I had. I didn't need power or wealth to do that. I just needed love. And for the first time in my life, I understood that. I had always been the one to make decisions, to control, to enforce. But now, I realized that sometimes the greatest strength came from letting go. Letting go of the need to control everything. Letting go of the fear of losing what you have. And letting in the people who truly matter. My daughter, the maid, and I were a family now. And that was the most powerful thing in the world. As I stood there, watching them, I felt a sense of peace that I had never known before. The future was no longer uncertain. It was full of hope. Hope for the family we had become. Hope for the life we would build together. I didn't need to be the strongest man in the room anymore. I didn't need to be the one who controlled everything. I just needed to be the father, the man, the person I had always wanted to be. And with that, I knew I had everything I needed. I had my family, and that was enough. Immerse yourself in this captivating tale of transformation and healing. This emotional journey delves deep into the lives of a family struggling with the weight of power, control, and unspoken feelings. Follow a Mafia boss as he learns the true meaning of love and family through the quiet strength of a woman who was once just a maid. As the story unfolds, we witness how simple acts of kindness and trust can change everything. Romance stories have the power to inspire, and this one is no different. Watch as the bond between father, daughter, and maid grows stronger with each passing day. Through shared moments of tenderness and understanding, this story proves that love is the ultimate strength. If you're a fan of romance stories that explore deep emotional connections, you'll find this one particularly moving. The power of vulnerability, empathy, and unconditional love shines through every page of this story, reminding us all of what truly matters in life. Romance stories like this are the perfect escape into the world of heartfelt emotions, and this one will resonate with you long after the last word. Don't miss out on this heartfelt and transformative journey, where family, love, and connection take center stage in a way that only romance stories can deliver.